Good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation of CQL's decision making on the personal outcome measures. My name is Kathy Adamick and I'm joined by our quality enhancement specialist, Jill Westring, who will be facilitating the workshop or the webinar. Just to know, we are recording this, and the recording and the PowerPoint will be available in a couple of weeks on our website. If you have any questions at any time, please feel free to type those into the question box, and we will answer those accordingly. If you registered and signed on, we'll have a record of your attendance at this webinar if you signed in under your name. Obviously, if you are attending in someone else's under someone else's login, we won't have your name on our registration list. But we are happy to have each and every one of you on the call. And without further ado, let's have Jill tell us a little bit about what we're going to do today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am in the lovely state of North Dakota this week, and it's a little windy, but I hope everyone is enjoying their spring. We are on session 2 of 6 sessions, and we are happy to have Lennon with us as the interviewee for the POMs for this decision-making grouping, the 6 sessions. If you missed last session, you can go back and re-review that. It will give you more of an idea of where we are, because it all builds as everything does in an interview with personal outcome measures. It builds upon each other. We have tried to make it fairly clear, bringing in some past things and so that you would be able to make decisions. If you're kind of new to this process, and we did this last year also, but the process is we will give you the information. Today's session is about rights, and we will be talking about rights and people exercise rights and treated fairly. And so we usually don't just have 2, but it's a really big area. Number 7, the respect, as we do during our interviews also, we usually don't really talk about that or make decisions about that until the very last part of the session. Even though it's number 7, we kind of wait to talk about that because it's kind of the whole thing that we want to look at as far as respect goes. So I've jumped ahead a couple slides. Kathy's very good in trying to keep us together. Just a little bit about Lennon. When I met with Lennon, she is 31 years old. She lives in her own apartment. She has a job at Pizza Hut. She likes to shop a lot, both in person and online. Her favorite things are shoes, bohemian clothing, and decorations in her home. She loves to host dinner parties, and she likes to bake bread. She's just starting out kind of learning how to do that. She's interested in going forward in flower gardening, acting, and some photography. She is not married, has no children, but has twin nieces, Ashley and Taylor. These are the results. We will be putting these in each time as we go forward as to what has been in the past. As you can see with safety, there were opportunities for both outcome and support in her safety. Free from abuse and neglect, she was indeed both outcome and support for that. She has best possible health and in both outcome and support. And there were opportunities for her to continue, for her continuity and security in both outcomes and supports. So after today's next session, next month, we will include the rights and treated fairly in this database. Before we start with rights and treated fairly, we really want to talk a little bit about the adequate due process it seems to be a point that is like what is adequate and what isn't. And so we wanted to just be sure to bring this up. It is on page 29 in your manual, and that is under rights, but it certainly goes into the treated fairly as we talk about due process in both areas of measurement for outcomes and supports. So on page 29, rights begins on page 28 in your manual, and this is on 29. And what I have been seeing and hearing and finding is that we're really not using this page very, to the extent it could be used when we're looking at what that adequate due process is. And so even though, you know, I've done hundreds of outcome interviews, that I have to go back sometimes and really think about what is a due process for the person. Again, you know, for the outcome, it's have those due process procedures been done. It's not just a rubber stamp through a human rights committee, but it's really that advocacy part of asking and acting and advocating on behalf of the person for their rights, including, of course, education, experience, and exposure to the Human Rights Committee, if they have had it through a court system for whatever reason, including the first time they went through it. Are they a part of every time a guardian needs to kind of give that update to the judge? Are they a part of it? Do they understand it? Do they know what guardianship is? Do they know what representative payeeship is? Do they understand what due process is? Just as you or I would have an attorney when we go in front of a court or a judge or someone that can make a determination about restricting our rights and our freedoms. So not just civil and legal, but we've got some personal freedoms that we also don't allow people to just take away from us simply on a whim or because without some education on that. So in the adequate due process procedures, we're really looking for those limitations, restrictions that are based on specific need, that people are informed and knowing when they can regain those rights through that due process procedure. And not just saying that risks outweigh, but what are we doing in part and parcel of that also. A legally authorized representative, if there is one, to give informed consent, and that may be so, but the person still has to be informed. So if they want to change that legally authorized representative, that advocacy would be in place and supports would be there for them. The organization demonstrates a less intrusive. So if we're going into, again, that Human Rights Committee, do we have that historical sort of documentation and understanding of what has been tried prior to making a restriction for that due process? The Human Rights Committee becomes the due process, the judge and the jury. Is there a plan to promote that skill development or other strategies or strategic plans to lessen that reliance on it? The organization demonstrates the restriction will cause no harm, and the person has a fair and impartial hearing, typically accomplished by inviting the person. And I'm hearing more and more often, well, we offer the opportunity for people to attend. It's more complicated than that, and it takes more energy than just saying, do you want to go to it? It's really talking about and perhaps a prior meeting and a post meeting to talk about so that the person can actually voice their opinion on it when they go in and have an understanding of what this whole series of events is going on with them. So we want to make sure that they have the advocate from the organization or their legal representative or whatever it is. It also, adequate due process also entails understanding and being educated on grievance procedures, because I might not know what I need to do in due process if I don't understand that I have a right to disagree. I have a right to grieve the decision made, and and so on and so forth. And we'll get into that a little more as we go into the rights and the treated fairly of this. So that will be, again, in your manual on page 29. We won't show it again up here to go back to it. So if you will do that, and I think we can move forward. So what happens is that I basically read through this. Some of you can read faster than others, but I will read through it because there are about 3 slides on this. So if you're taking notes, please take your notes as we go through, so that you can make your own decisions and about the outcome and support. So exercising rights for Lennon. Guardianship is an ongoing rights restriction, ongoing. And Lennon has asked for a different guardian. She knows that a guardian can make her do things that she may not want to do. A family member is currently her legal plenary guardian. The process is in motion to identify a guardian that Lennon wants. Right now, she has stated that she wants her program manager to be her guardian. They have discussed this with her, and she understands that her program manager cannot be her guardian. It's a conflict of interest. And although she doesn't necessarily understand that conflict of interest, she understands that just because her program manager can't be her guardian. Lennon has no one else that she identifies as being close enough to her to be a guardian, because she doesn't want just a stranger, but she wants someone other than her family member. The Human Rights Committee is aware of her request to change her guardian, and this is coming before the Human Rights Committee on a monthly basis. Lennon chooses to attend those monthly committee meetings. Next slide. There are additional restrictions for Lennon. She has support to review her mail so that her right to privacy is somewhat limited. She is asked for and consented to this support for reviewing her mail. She's always present when the staff look at her mails. They don't open it without her being there, and is receiving education regarding recognizing and responding to requests from her family for money. And that is why this is put into place in the first place. The HRC, the Human Rights Committee, has reviewed it and is scheduled for review again in December. Of course, if something would happen between there, she could bring it up any time, especially since the guardianship, she's in front of the HRC at monthly meetings, and she understands that. But right now, she's fine with that being there, although the committee reviews it anyway. The organization serves as Lennon's representative payee, and they are responsible for managing her benefit money. She also has a trust fund. She gets her money from her benefits and trust fund upon request, so she can ask for it at any time. She does manage her earnings with some support. She has her own checking account at a different bank so that she can manage that money. Taking any notes, and we'll go on to the next slide. Lennon exercises other rights she deems important to herself. For example, she votes, she chooses not to attend church, and she has a lot of personal decision-making. She feels that she's making lots of her own decisions. She explained that she makes her own decisions as family who are the legal guardians. One of them, as a legal guardian, does not help her with daily decisions, and Lennon asks preferred staff to help with those if she needs help. Lennon does not exactly know what guardianship means. She's not had formal education about the decisions that she can or cannot make based on those formal court hearings, the guardianship papers themselves. She's not quite sure about that. No formal, there's some talk about it, but as you remember, she said that she knows that somehow a guardian can make decisions she may not want. So taking your notes, how this next part is going to happen is that we are going to look through the personal outcome questions for the outcome, and you all will make your own decisions about what that is. Then we will go through the support questions, and then we will poll. Okay, so for the outcome questions, to begin with, if you go down at the very bottom, if each right in number 5.1 is yes, keep in mind those choice making, the outcome can be present. For rights not exercised, is it due to informed choice? If the limitations are approved with adequate due process, the outcome is present. So we're looking at whether or not Lennon can take care of her personal possessions, wages, voicing her opinion, voting, religion, privacy, freedom from coercion and restraint, access to her money as a possession, decision-making, moving about her community, file complaints about services, access to food, and having visitors. In addition, are there other rights or that are limited or restricted? 5.2, for each of the rights the person does not exercise, who most limits their ability to exercise each of those rights? And then 5.3, for each of the rights Lennon does not exercise, was adequate due process provided? So you won't be telling us your decisions right now, but looking at these and making your decision if the rights for Lennon, if she is exercising her rights, for the outcome. Next slide. So just think, jot it down, and we're going to go through the supports then also. So just give you a second here to make that decision. And we'll go on then to supports for her rights. Individualized supports for Lennon. 5A, are Lennon's preferences and desires about the exercise of rights solicited by the organization? So this is a really big issue. It's like, who's talking to everybody about their rights, about that whole list of rights and additional ones, which include those things such as, could be, you know, certainly for people in congregate living. Are there blanket restrictions or house rules, even for Lennon when it's in her own apartment? If there are some rules that might not rise to the rights, but there are rules that infringe upon those things. 5B, have the rights that are important to Lennon been identified, or are there efforts being made to learn about Lennon's preferences? That ask, act, and advocate are education, exposure to an experiential sort of living. And then C, is Lennon provided with the support needed to exercise his or her rights, to exercise her rights? Based on the answers, and again, for those of you that don't know the yes, no, 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 for this exercise, it will either be a yes or a no. When you put these in the portal, you can use the no, that we're developing plans, or no, we're aware, but we haven't even thought about plans, or no, they're just not in place. But for this, again, this effort and this webinar, it will be yes or no. You can decide that on your own if you're using, developing, or aware, so that you can look at that. So the next slide is the poll, please. So if you will poll for, is the outcome present and is the support present? Kathy, I can't hear you.
So Jill, the rights on the outcome, we're pretty well split. 41% say yes, 59% say no. And the same is true for this, the support. So both for the outcome and the support, we're pretty well split down the middle.
Right, and can all the attendees see the results?
They should be able to, yes.
Okay, all right. If you can, we have, for the outcome, we have that 41% of you said that it is present, and 59% said that it was not present. The outcome for Lennon for this particular outcome is that it is not present. The support, 46% of you said it was present, and 54 said that it was not present. For the supports, it is not present today for her in exercising her rights. Now you can start asking questions.
So Jill, there's already one question.
Yep.
And this kind of goes back to the discussion about due process. So this person is saying that in the state she or he lives in, the guardianships are reviewed by the court system every 3 years, and they evaluate whether or not guardianship is still appropriate for the person. Does CQL recommend all guardianship be reviewed by a human rights committee regardless of review by the courts?
The short answer is yes, we do. We know that it has gone through the court due process for those and for those 3 years. However, in your manual, when you look at it, it talks about periodically reviewing that, and for the personal outcomes and for this tool and for the reliability of this tool, we say that it's periodically, a periodical is an annual sort of review. So we're looking for those outside eyes and making sure that there are not areas that the person wants back, part and parcel of things that their rights may be restricted by the courts. So that would be the advocacy part of what we would be doing for them.
All right, and then I think you explained why, but I'm going to ask the person if that answers their question.
Okay.
Then I think the other is, could you talk a little bit more about why we determined the outcome was not present?
Well, right now the guardianship is not where she wants it to be. And with that due process, that is what human rights is looking at. She is not happy with it. And even though the courts say that her family can be that, she does not want it that way. And so there has to be some sort of action on that because it's not presently what she agrees to. And so even with the court saying that we do have a right, you and I have a right to, what's the word in the court system? To ask that it be seen again. I'm sorry, I've forgotten. Appeal. That we have a right to appeal a decision, and that's not happening right now. So we're in an advocacy position for her at this time.
Okay, so other than guardianship, were there other issues that might make this outcome not present?
Well, we still have the right to live, the limitation to mail, and that privacy, and they're working on that, but it's not there yet. And the other one was that was just the mail, wasn't it?
Well, it's also her money, I think, Jill.
The mail and money. I'm sorry. Yes.
And then what about Rep Payee?
Rep Payee is part of this also because of the money, but that's why rights and treated fairly sometimes gets they're really entwined, and we will be talking more about the representative Payee in treated fairly, but it does come into being here because she doesn't understand, and we're not doing any sort of training on that trust fund, and she doesn't really understand what that is. So we need much more robust sort of education on her rights. we're really just very focused on the guardian, which is great. But there are a few things that the organization could do that wouldn't be very difficult to put in place that would allow this support to be in place for her.
So that goes into the next question, and they really feel like so that there is the question is, why are the supports no? I feel like the organization is helping her. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
They are, and this guardianship is huge to her, as I think it was indicated that she really wants somebody else. But the supports are that the preferences and desires have been solicited, that rights that are important have been identified, and providing those supports, those identified as also her money. She knows she can get her money, but she doesn't have a full understanding of and money's important to her, but we're not educating her on those rights also. We're doing the education on the mail, but not on her monies.
Right. So if we were looking at this one, there might be some promising things that are happening for this age, in terms of supports, but it's just not robust enough is the word we like to talk about a lot, isn't it?
Yes, as well as with the guardianship, she needs some more information some more education on what that actually means. It's a little more than just somebody can make a decision you don't want to know. And it's like, have we really looked at the guardianship papers? What exactly do they say? Are there because some states write it out very clearly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the 5 things that a plenary guardian can make decisions about, but nothing else. And so we're not sure with the family, and the organization is aware of it and doing some stuff. There just are some opportunities for them to be going. So they're aware, and it's not that they don't have any plans. So it could be aware and developing those plans. And there could be a couple other action steps that go in there besides that. Rights are huge. It's a huge area. And we have to have that formal and informal training and education that goes on for people to truly understand civic, legal, guardianship, those rights that many times we just take for granted because no one is infringing upon those for us.
So Jill, then there's another question. So what if the person doesn't have the ability to understand rights or guardianship or those kinds of things?
We would always be doing education and doing learning moments no matter what we're doing, and we would be that advocate. And if you're talking about someone that may not use our language, we need to try it. It's very much that solicitation of the person's preferences and desires, again, in the support system, the support questions, and that we would be really looking for those rights that are identified as most important, and then putting in very robust supports for that, so that everybody knows, so that everybody understands that person's language. Again, we would be talking to the people who know them best, and those people that they've selected to be interpreters.
Okay, good, thank you. And then, so if there's if the decision is that there's an opportunity for the person in terms of the outcome, can the supports ever be present for the organization?
Sure. Yeah. There's nothing that says that it could not be there. Short answer is yes. There's never a yes or no always. So it can be both ways, or all 4 ways.
Right.
Or 6 ways, or whatever ways, however many ways mathematically you can make that happen.
Right. So correct. So if there can be an opportunity for the person, but there can be supports in place that are likely to help the person have the outcome.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. And so if there's any rights that have been taken away and the person, Lennon, doesn't agree to that, is it always an opportunity?
If they don't agree with it and they are using their appeal process, if you will, or their the grievance process of the organization, um, yeah, they can disagree all they want, and always remembering that taking someone's any right away from anyone should be the very, very, very last course of action for any organization. I'm not sure if I answered the question.
Okay, I think that you did. We'll have the person can ask again if.
All right.
So then another question. So, you know, this is one of the struggles that many organizations have. Lennon doesn't like the person who's currently her guardian, wants to change guardians. But what if there isn't anyone else that she would choose to be her guardian?
Well, we could also look at supported decision making. Maybe she doesn't need a plenary guardian, and so what is our advocacy efforts on that part of it? Maybe she just needs supported decision making. Maybe she would only, that she's okay with that. Maybe she doesn't need any guardianship at all, and so would be with a power of attorney. I mean, are we educating her about those other options? And maybe it's really just the point of, does she need that full guardianship? And I know that many times we struggle with finding guardians, but we also need to be looking at those lesser areas that anyone might be able to support someone without taking all those rights away. Plus, it's very expensive, both to get it and to get rid of it. So that's another process that should be beginning as we're talking about limiting people's rights with guardianships when they're younger.
Right. So what is the decision making? And clearly she has some decision making skills.
Yes.
And practice, and even knows to ask for help if she feels like she's in over her head or wants some help. And, which is the same thing that many people without disabilities do, is we don't make decisions independently. We make them in consultation with other people. And that's that whole movement towards the supported decision making. Right. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. So what if a person with an expressive language disorder, and what if a person has this expressive language disorder, their parents are their guardians, and the guardian makes decisions? What does an organization do to help the person have this outcome?
Right.
What kind of supports might they put in place?
It really, again, we love our families, and they are our watchdogs, and they work very hard to keep their children safe. And we're not looking to take away any sort of decision making from families. What we want to do is educate and talk with them about those decision making skills that the person can make. How can we help them with the supports so that it's not scary? And what are some of the decisions that people can make? So that guardianship. And as we get older, many times we learn how to make better decisions. We hope that we learn to make better decisions, and we just change in our thinking many times. So the families are the guardians, and we just want to make sure that we're educating and talking with them about what maybe the person could do. One more piece, is there something that they might like to do, or something that we have discovered that they are pretty interested in making decisions about? And it varies on what the parent or the guardian sees as their role. So we want to be pretty clear about what that is, and help everybody kind of discover that learning process, and discovery about what I get to control in my life.
Thank you. And so just a couple more questions, Jill. So what if, Lennon or anybody else had a guardian, and the guardian passed away, and there was no one in the family that wanted to step forward and really serve in that role. What kinds of supports, or what would you think agencies could do?
Boy, that's a tough one, and it happens, and it happens often. And so, my question always is, what happens? All of a sudden, as you're asking, all of a sudden the guardian passes. There's no one else, and so now all of a sudden I don't have to have a guardian. You can't be your own guardian. I was just about to say that, but that I don't need a guardian anymore, because with the dying of my parent, the death of my parent, I somehow have more and better decision-making skills. It's very hard, and I don't have a magic answer for that. If the person does need that and there's no family involved, many times the organization kind of steps up and builds in supported decision-making rather than looking for another guardian, or we have searched and we can't find one. And it's not an easy place to be, but if no one steps up, there are organizations and places all over the world that then we pay for a guardian to do that, and or we get a state guardian, and it's like, is that really the role of a guardian? We have to ask ourselves and talk about it. And organizations need to kind of help the person make those decisions too, or have a committee that's, I hate to say consent committees, but you have more than one person. Maybe the Human Rights Committee for that person becomes the one that really does look at any restrictions or helps become the guardian, if you will, of, not legally, but the guardian or the watchdog over finances and those sort of things. Because I've seen many, many times where paid guardianship or guardianship through organizations that provide that service, might be in Virginia and I'm in Nebraska, and, guardians are usually people that it's not that they don't care about the person or that they're not watching out for them, but you think of a guardian and you think of somebody that's a little more involved in one's life than that. And that's sometimes hard to find. So I'm sorry I can't just answer that, but there are many different ways that organizations go around that.
Well, and I think as we get into some of the future discussions around relationship building and the opportunity for people to develop friendships and natural supports that are maybe not always relatives, and really building their own social capital, that the likelihood that they have people around them who care about them and will support them becomes much stronger.
And without it going through any sort of legal process.
Mm-hmm.
A power of attorney could be for end of life, say, or, who gets to make the decisions about me if I'm in an accident and I can't speak for myself anymore. And that's where we need to look for people who aren't speaking for themselves, their voice. They don't have that voice to do it. Who's making those, who is their voice?
Right. Okay, well, we probably should move on to people are treated fairly. And see, it's been a great discussion. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Kathy, the poll is still up.
Did it go away now, Jill?
It did not on mine. Let me see if I can just close mine out. I don't know if anybody else is seeing it or not. Oh, I can just close mine.
Perfect.
There we go. Treated fairly. And we are on page 32 of the manual. And so for money, I can't quite see everything because our pictures are in there. But regarding money, and this is where we're going. The organization is Lennon's representative payee. Lennon has a trust fund, although she doesn't really know exactly what that means. At this time, the organization is not formally educating Lennon on her financial situation, as guardianship has taken priority. She said that she can buy whatever she wants, whenever she wants, simply by asking staff for her money. The Human Rights Committee does not review that. It does not review the representative payee, as their state regulations do not require such review, and the staff stated it is to keep her money safe from family exploitation, so it is considered a support and not a restriction. Lennon did not identify anything else in her life that is unfair. She lives on her own, no one enters her apartment without her permission, and she keeps her personal possessions without worry. The agency does have policy and procedure around complaints and or grievances. They review the process with everyone in the organization, including Lennon, at their annual planning meeting and during periodic reviews of progress towards goals. It was during one of these reviews, about 6 months ago, that Lennon complained about her guardian and said she was frustrated. The program manager then developed an action plan with Lennon that included a referral to protection and advocacy for the guardianship, review by the Human Rights Committee, and a list of potential guardians. The program manager and Lennon meet before each Human Rights Committee meeting to review progress so that Lennon can advocate for herself at that meeting. So again, we will do the same as we did before. The personal outcome questions for the decision-making are, have fair treatment or rights limitation been identified? And this is for and on behalf of, by and on behalf of Lennon. If the answer to 6.1 is yes, the rights limitation as identified in the People Exercise Rights section was adequate due process provided. In addition to those, are there other rights that are limited or restricted? And if so, was adequate due process provided? For any fair treatment issue, was the issue addressed so that Lennon's concerns were resolved to their satisfaction? So we look at if the answers to 6.2 and 6.3 are yes, the outcome is present. So we're looking again, is there adequate due process provided for any limitations or restrictions? So you will make note for those additional considerations. Type and extent of due process depends on which right is to be limited. The greater the impact on a person's life, the greater the requirement for review and protection. Some rights limitations are due to criminal behavior, which does not an issue for Lennon at this time, but to be able to look at that. And limited by law, the due process is through the court system. So some rights limitations such as guardianship or commitment to a facility are put in place through the legal system. The organization is expected to regularly review the restriction and implement strategies to reduce the need or reliance on that restriction. So one of the questions before is, what are the expectations for review of any restrictions and rights restrictions? It comes in here also, as well as in the body of the manual. So make your decisions on whether or not the outcome to be treated fairly is present for Lennon. Take just a moment. And now we'll look at what supports are in place. Pardon me. A, has the organization solicited, again, are we asking about rights violations and fair treatment? Are we doing the ask, act, and advocate from the person? And that has to be fairly robust. It's not just a checklist of rights or fair treatment. Many times during an interview, I'll talk to people, does anything feel unfair? Because we kind of grow up knowing what's unfair. That's not fair. And it's like somebody gets something that we don't get. B, have procedures for adequate due process for any identified rights limitations been implemented? C, are those procedures used by the organization consistent with due process principles of which we've just discussed? And D, does the organization respond to fair treatment issues to address any concerns? Based on those to those questions, are supports in place to facilitate Lennon's treated fairly? Again, I'm not going to read through these. We put them in twice because they work. At times they'll be talking about the outcome and then support. So make your decisions and we will poll. Go. About half of you have answered. Those of you that still want to, please do so. Poll has been closed.
So Jill, on this one, there's a little bit more decisiveness on her whether or not the outcome is present for Lennon. 34% of us say yes, 66% say no. For the support to be treated fairly, 38% say yes and 62% say no.
Okay. So the outcome to be treated fairly with, again, due process, the survey says, no, it is not present for Lennon at this time. For Lennon, is there support to be treated fairly present? The answer is no, it is not in place at this time. Again, as we've talked a little bit, they're doing some things, but we're really looking for that treated fairly. And guardianship comes into play here again, as well as monies and money as a possession, and those and representative payee and guardianship. And excuse me, Kathy, some people are raising their hands, and I don't know if you're getting those, if that's where they're supposed to be chatting for you.
Right. So if I cannot do anything to help you if you raise your hand. If you have a question, it's best if you can type it in the question box. So I don't know if there's one person who had their hand up, but I can't. There isn't anything I can do to help you to be able to share. I would need you to type your question in the question box. I'm sorry.
I just don't want to miss anyone if they have questions.
Correct. I agree, Jill. Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is a kind of a question that I think fits both in rights and treated fairly. When we talked about rights, Jill, you talked about some of the rights that are listed in the manual, but not every one of them.
Right, correct.
Can you talk a little bit about, are we supposed to always ask about all of those rights, or how would you do that?
Well, as you know, some of those rights we will find in where people live, of choice making, choice of services. So, you know, we were trying to put that in because this learning situation is, you know, you don't have every information about everything. So we wanted to make sure that we look at those, because those are some of the larger kind of civic and citizen rights. But there are rights that rise to, you know, my right to go outside at night after 9 o'clock, or my right to actually get a phone call after 9 o'clock at night, or that might rise to a rights restriction for one person and not for another. So we would really kind of be looking back on that, and through an entire interview process or a conversation, we might need to go back to the rights and say, you know, I heard you talking about this particular thing. Do you see that as being treated fairly, or do you see that as a right that kind of is restricted for you? And then we would have another discussion about that to see if it would flow into there. So when the discussion is, are there other things going on? Are there other rights or treated fairly issues that the person brought up? We would look at it at that too, into that area. So it really is an ebb and flow as you're doing the conversation. You can't just ask one question and go, okay, you know. So it jumps around, as I'm sure all of you that do any sort of personal outcome measures, conversations, interviews are fully aware.
Sure, thank you. So sometimes when you're talking about rules and using environments, you might find some rights limitations as well.
There you go. Perfect
Um,
example. Yeah.
right. You know, and the person and the staff, sometimes the organization doesn't always see those rules as rights limitations, because they, you know, you haven't thought about them in that way. And it is true that sometimes people who share a home agree upon rules, like we're
Right.
not going to have the TV on a volume greater than whatever after, you know, 11 o'clock at night. But so those would be, you know, so sometimes when we ask about rules, we also ask about who's involved in making those rules and deciding whether or not they're in place.
Right.
And then the other thing is that sometimes we find that there are rules that people think are rules, but maybe nobody else really knows they are, but they don't think they can make a decision about when to go to bed because they've always gone to bed at 8:30.
Right.
And so sometimes it's about making sure people know that they have the right to make different decisions and change those things. Um, so so we have a few more questions and a little bit more time, so but not much. So let's see if we can do this. Jill, do you have any recommendations in terms of guardianship assessments, you know, to guide a regular review of the person's need for guardianship?
I don't have offhand. I would, you know, if you know, we've got the World Wide Web, you know, to really look. I know that there are assessments out there for guardianship, but it really is getting to know the person, and when they become of age, when we become adults, that is when we have a really great opportunity to talk and educate and have really robust conversations about what kind of guardianship people might need. And for any guardianship that at this point, you know, the Human Rights Committee is not going to be the ones saying they don't need guardianship. Because number one, if a guardianship comes into question, it probably is going to be coming as a quite possibly, with what I've seen, it's either an abuse or an exploitation or a neglectful sort of issue that would come up outside of just kind of a regular, I'm going to help you with your money and I'm going to decide where you live and I'm going to decide where you work, or, you know, but there are other things that come into play, such as state guardianships, or those that are just kind of blanket guardianships, that it's where, who you marry, if you can vote, and there are other things in there. So it really is looking at that guardianship and talking to the people about the restrictions they have because of that guardianship.
One of the things that you might look at that I haven't personally used, but it was developed by the Bar Association in support of kind of trying to look at supported decision making and what kind of supports do people need, is it's a tool called Practical, PRACT, however you spell practical. Now I'm not going to be able to spell it because I'm on national radio. Practical tool, that's like Jill said, if you just Google practical tool, you'll find it, and it might be a good resource for you. The other thing to look at is just the National Resource Center for Supported Decision Making, that may not have an assessment about guardianship, but it would be looking at individuals' needs for our supports for making decisions. And if we look at guardianship as one of those ways that supports people to make decisions, then that's highly restrictive, we might add, it might help you to think about that. Instead of a guardianship assessment, it's really about a decision-making assessment. So go on to the next question. And so with regards to a rep payee, if the organization has been accredited in the past and it's been recognized that this is something that happens through the state, and they no longer take it through the Human Rights Committee, and in the past, maybe that hasn't come up in the accreditation review. Is it a change in how CQL is doing accreditation, and how will this affect organizations that are being reaccredited who are not taking that restriction through the Human Rights Committee? There are annual reviews per the state requirements for both rep payee and guardianship in the person's plan.
So it's okay. I'm a little confused. So they're not going through, or they are going through? The state has regulations that say they must be reviewed by the Human Rights Committee?
No, I think it's through the individual plan.
Oh, I see what you're saying. We have not changed that. We have asked for that. You might find that it might not have risen to something for those folks that have been accredited, but we have always asked for this in the personal outcome measures. If you are not doing that, we will ask for a plan to have that in place if you're going through accreditation.
It wouldn't necessarily have to go through every year. You can write your plan about how it's reviewed and when it gets put forward for review. It just should be part of your plan. So, but we can also refer this question to Catherine Dunbar, who's the Vice President of Accreditation. And I've written down your name, so I'll see if she can get back in touch with you.
I mean, it's not gonna pull your accreditation.
Right.
That's not gonna happen. It's just, yeah. But in the POMs, it would be part of your personal outcome plan. Your personal in accreditation, when we go through and do the POM plan, it would probably show up there also.
Right. Okay. I'm making sure I didn't. So then the next question is, if a person cannot call someone after 9 p.m. because that person has said that they don't want them to do that, is this a rights restriction? And is this a rights restriction? And then how does the responsibility to behave according to accepted norms fit into this?
So the person does not want to make a call after 9 o'clock.
The person does not want to receive a call after 9 o'clock, but I want to call them.
Oh, Well, I don't answer your phone call. Number one. I mean, there's really no, some people I know talk till midnight because they like to chat starting at 9 o'clock at night. But they're not the ones calling me at 9 o'clock at night, because my decision is I don't answer the phone after 9 o'clock at night because I don't want to get into an hour and a half, So that would be worked out between two friends, and the support being there and saying, don't call me after 9. I'm not going to answer.
So I think it becomes a rights restriction depending upon how we respond to it. So it's not dissimilar to if I have door alarms or door chimes on that announce, when somebody comes and goes.
Mhm.
But if when the door chime goes off, you come to see if it's me and you stop me, then that's when it becomes a restriction. And so if you stop me from calling, then it may indeed be a restriction. But if you just tell me, Kathy, Jill doesn't like it when you call after 9 o'clock and she's not going to answer the phone, or she's not going to be pleasant to you if she does answer the phone, then that's kind of the natural consequence. But if you stop me from doing that, it probably is a rights limitation. Does that make sense? I hope it does.
And maybe it might fall under treated fairly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you actually stop, it'd go into a rights, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Right, it would. It would.
Yeah, it would.
Okay, so one more question and then we have to finish. So in the last webinar, we talked about Lennon, and Lennon had asked the staff to help her open her mail as a support, not that the agency suggested that. So is that a rights restriction? And maybe I'm just not remembering it correctly.
Well, she is asking for that support, but she really wants to open her own mail, and so they are training and educating, not training, but educating her on which are bills, if you remember from last time, which are bills and which is correspondence it's just junk mail, and then she's getting, but she had not received anything from her family for over a year. Since the last correspondence of them asking for money. And so we would still see that, you and I as an organization would still see that as some sort of restriction to her privacy, even it's on behalf of her that we see that as a treated fairly. So we would continue to do what we need to do in order for us to lessen our intrusion on her privacy there. I hope that answered that.
Okay, and again, thank you everyone for your good questions. We appreciate that very much. And we will continue this decision-making series. We just put 2 on the screen, so we're not planning your whole summer, just the next couple of months. And so we hope you can join us for session 3 that will focus on those indicators in community. On June the 27th at 1 p.m. We're looking forward to seeing your names and hearing your questions then. Thank you all very much.
Thank you all. Bye-bye. Have a good spring. See you in the summer.